I remember sitting across from my boss, watching the excitement in their eyes over the $5 million deal. I spoke up, warned them about potential pitfalls, the risks nobody else seemed to notice, but my words were brushed aside. "We've got this," they said, with a confidence I knew was fragile. Every sleepless night I spent analyzing the numbers, every detail I highlighted went ignored. And then it happened. The cracks I had predicted started appearing. Emails were lost, miscalculations emerged, and suddenly, the deal that seemed untouchable began to crumble. Watching the chaos unfold was a mix of pain and quiet vindication. My voice, once dismissed, was now the voice that had foreseen everything. My boss's pride took a hit, their confidence shattered, and the $5 million that everyone celebrated was slipping through their fingers. It was a brutal lesson in accountability, in trusting your instincts even when others doubt you. And for me, it became a moment of personal empowerment, proof that truth, persistence, and courage are stronger than arrogance. From that day, I promised myself speak boldly, act wisely, and never let being ignored define your worth. I knew something was wrong the moment I looked at the deal documents. There was a number in the projections that didn't make sense, a clause in the contract that could easily backfire, and subtle warning signs that only someone paying attention could catch. I spent hours analyzing spreadsheets, reviewing contracts line by line, and comparing every figure with previous deals, trying to piece together the full picture. The more I looked, the heavier the weight on my chest became. I could feel a storm brewing, one that no one else seemed to notice. My heart raced every time I imagined the consequences if anyone ignored it. The first time I raised my concerns, I did it carefully, almost hesitantly. I didn't want to sound alarmist or like I was undermining my boss, who everyone admired and trusted. I framed it logically, pointing out inconsistencies in projections and potential risks that could surface at the worst possible moment. "This could cause serious trouble if we don't address it," I said, hoping they would see the urgency. But they just smiled, a casual, dismissive smile that made my chest tighten. "Don't worry, we've handled bigger deals than this. It's fine," they said, waving off my concerns as if I were overreacting. I tried again, this time with more evidence. I gathered supporting data, historical trends, emails from other departments, even warnings from external partners that aligned with my fears. I thought that if I presented the facts clearly, they would have no choice but to reconsider. I scheduled a meeting, prepared a detailed report, and walked in ready to make them understand. But once again, they barely skimmed the pages, nodding politely, but not really listening. "We don't need to worry about this right now. Focus on your tasks," they said. I felt invisible in that moment, like my voice had no weight at all. It wasn't just frustration that hit me. It was fear. I could see it unfolding in my mind: months of work, countless hours invested by our team, and a $5 million deal that could collapse if these risks weren't addressed. Every missed warning added another layer of tension, like a rope tightening around my chest. I stayed awake at night, replaying scenarios over and over, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining the disaster, trying to hold back the anxiety that came from knowing the truth. My instincts were screaming, but everyone around me treated it as noise, as if I was exaggerating for attention. I also started noticing subtle signs of my boss's overconfidence affecting decisions. They ignored small suggestions from colleagues, brushed off questions about details, and carried themselves with a certainty that made it even harder to make them listen. The harder I tried, the more I felt like I was shouting into a storm that wouldn't hear me. I began documenting everything, writing notes, screenshots, emails, hoping that if the worst happened, I could show that I had warned them. That small act of preparation gave me a fragile sense of control amidst the helplessness. Every time I spoke up and got ignored, it chipped away at something inside me. I loved my work, believed in the company, and wanted the deal to succeed. But being dismissed repeatedly left me with a knot of anger and anxiety that I couldn't untangle. I tried talking to peers, hoping someone could help me convince the boss, but many were afraid to push too hard. The responsibility felt like it rested solely on my shoulders, and the tension was suffocating. And then came the moment that changed everything. I had noticed a small but crucial detail, an overlook clause in the contract that could void the deal if certain conditions weren't met. I brought it up once more, my voice firm, my hands slightly trembling. "This could ruin everything if we don't fix it," I said, looking straight into their eyes. For a split second, I thought maybe this time they would listen. But no. They dismissed it again, confident and blind to what was coming. I walked out of the room that day with a mix of dread and determination. I knew the storm was coming, and no matter what happened, I had done everything I could to warn them. Every ounce of my energy, every sleepless night, every careful analysis had been devoted to preventing disaster. My emotions were raw: fear for the team, frustration at being ignored, and a simmering resolve that when the truth came out, they would see that I had been right all along. Even in those moments, I felt a strange clarity. While my warnings were ignored, I realized that knowledge, preparation, and courage to speak up mattered more than approval. I had planted the seeds of truth, and though they were buried under arrogance and ignorance, I knew they would surface eventually. That feeling, that emotional hook of urgency and responsibility, stayed with me every day leading up to the moment when the consequences of being ignored would finally hit. The stakes of this deal were enormous. $5 million wasn't just a number. It represented months of work, countless hours of negotiation, and the reputations of everyone involved. I could feel the weight of it every time I walked into the office, every time I opened an email from a client, every time I prepared a presentation. This wasn't just another contract. It was a milestone for the company, a chance to prove that we could handle high-value, high-risk deals with precision and professionalism. The potential impact stretched beyond just the financial gain. It would influence career trajectories, client trust, and the very credibility of the leadership team. Everyone talked about success in terms of profit margins and quarterly reports, but I knew that if this deal failed, it could shake the foundation of the company. I remember the excitement in the office when the deal first came up. People were optimistic, everyone eager to contribute, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension beneath the surface. My team and I were constantly running scenarios, projecting outcomes, and trying to identify weak points. Even the smallest error could cascade into a major problem at this level. It wasn't just about the money, it was about delivering on promises, maintaining integrity with our clients, and proving that we could handle pressure without cutting corners. The stakes weren't abstract. They were tangible in every spreadsheet, every phone call, every clause in the contract. The clients involved were high profile, and their expectations were sky high. They weren't just interested in numbers, they wanted guarantees, precision, and confidence that we could execute flawlessly. I could see how my boss's enthusiasm sometimes overshadowed the need for meticulous review. They were eager to close the deal quickly, to make a big splash, and that urgency made my warnings feel even more critical. I knew that a single overlooked clause or miscalculated figure could cost us not just the $5 million, but also the trust of a client who could impact our company's reputation for years to come. Every day, I felt the pressure mounting. The office was buzzing with energy, but I could see cracks forming in how the deal was being handled. Small mistakes, overlooked details, and rushed decisions were accumulating like hidden bombs waiting to explode. I tried to communicate the gravity of the situation using every tool I had: charts, reports, comparisons to past deals, and potential risk assessments. I wanted to make the stakes visible, tangible, undeniable. Yet, despite my efforts, the magnitude of the risk seemed lost on my boss, who was blinded by ambition and overconfidence. The financial implications were massive, but the human element made it even more intense. Colleagues had invested weeks, some even months, into preparing for client meetings, drafting proposals, and coordinating logistics. They trusted leadership to make informed decisions, to recognize potential pitfalls, and to act responsibly. I felt a responsibility not only for the money but for the team, for their hard work and dedication. If this deal fell apart, it wouldn't just be numbers on a balance sheet. It would be their morale, their confidence, and their trust that were at stake. Even outside the office, I carried the weight of the deal. I would lie awake at night thinking about the potential consequences, imagining worst-case scenarios and how they would ripple through the company. The thought of a $5 million loss wasn't abstract, it was real, immediate, and terrifying. It could mean layoffs, damage to client relationships, and a permanent dent in the company's credibility. Every warning I gave was fueled by this understanding, the recognition that what was at stake went far beyond profit, reaching into every corner of the organization and affecting the lives of real people. I also realized that the stakes were not just external but internal. My boss's reputation, the leadership team's decision-making credibility, and my own professional integrity were all on the line. If the deal failed, it wouldn't just be a financial loss. It would be a testament to ignored advice, overlooked details, and preventable mistakes. I felt the weight of the responsibility in my chest every time I approached my boss with concerns, knowing that ignoring my warnings could have repercussions far beyond what anyone anticipated. The bigger the stakes, the more intense my determination became. I spent hours mapping out every risk, predicting potential points of failure, and strategizing contingency plans. I wasn't just worried about the money. I was obsessed with ensuring that no one would be blindsided by preventable mistakes. I wanted to safeguard the deal, protect my colleagues, and ensure that the company's reputation remained intact. The $5 million wasn't just a contract. It was a symbol of everything we had worked for, a challenge to our competence, and a test of whether diligence and foresight could prevail in a world often ruled by haste and overconfidence. As the deadlines approached, the stakes became almost tangible. Every decision, every call, every meeting had the potential to tip the balance. I could feel the pressure in my chest, the responsibility in my mind, and the urgency in my voice whenever I tried to raise concerns. I knew that if the deal collapsed, it wouldn't just be a failed business transaction. It would be the unraveling of months of effort, ambition, and trust. The scale of what was at risk made every ignored warning feel like a dagger, and every moment of inattention a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. The feeling of being disregarded by someone you respect and work for is a unique kind of frustration. It's not just that your advice wasn't heeded. It's the emotional weight of knowing you saw the danger clearly while the person in charge, the one everyone trusts, chose to ignore it. Every time I tried to make my point, I could feel the tension in the room, the subtle dismissal in their tone, the polite nods that meant nothing. It was as if my voice was invisible, my knowledge irrelevant, my effort undervalued. I began noticing it in small ways, a casual shrug when I explained a risk, a distracted glance at their phone while I presented evidence, a quick, "we'll handle it," that cut through my carefully prepared arguments. Each of these moments piled on, creating a heavy, almost suffocating mix of disbelief, frustration, and quiet indignation. Being ignored wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a blow to my sense of purpose. I had spent hours analyzing the deal, foreseeing risks that could destroy millions, and yet it felt like none of that mattered. It was as if my expertise and dedication were invisible, overlooked in favor of ego and haste. I kept asking myself how someone could be so confident, so sure that the problems I highlighted didn't exist, when the evidence was so clear. Every warning I offered, every potential issue I flagged, was met with dismissive words or a pat on the back, as if to pacify me rather than actually address the problem. The cognitive dissonance of knowing I was right while watching the decision-makers act as if I were wrong gnawed at me relentlessly. The more I was ignored, the sharper the frustration became, transforming slowly into a mix of determination and resentment. I wasn't trying to be difficult or obstinate. I was trying to protect the company, the deal, and the people who had invested time and trust into it. Yet, the repeated dismissals felt like betrayal. It wasn't just about being ignored in a meeting. It was about being rendered powerless despite holding critical information that could prevent disaster. I began to notice that the disregard was not merely a matter of oversight. It was an arrogance, a confidence that blinds people to voices they consider secondary. That arrogance in itself was dangerous. There were moments when the emotional toll became almost unbearable. Sitting in meetings where my points were waved off, listening to my boss make decisions that ignored the facts I presented, I felt a profound sense of helplessness. It wasn't just about the deal. It was about being trusted to see things others couldn't, yet having that trust dismissed. The frustration wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. I felt the injustice of knowing that my insights could have prevented mistakes, that my warnings were accurate, and yet my credibility seemed to count for nothing. The emotional strain weighed on me like a constant pressure, tightening with each ignored message, each overlooked risk, and each casual dismissal. I also noticed the ripple effects of this disregard. Colleagues who witnessed my efforts being ignored started questioning whether speaking up was even worthwhile. The atmosphere of the office shifted subtly. Caution and careful analysis began to seem futile, overshadowed by blind optimism and ego-driven decision-making. I could see the tension mounting not just in myself but around me. Others were wary, reluctant to push ideas forward, fearing the same dismissal. The emotional impact of being ignored extended far beyond my own experience, affecting the morale of the team and planting seeds of doubt about leadership, judgment, and the value of individual contribution. The experience was a lesson in how toxic disregard can be. Being ignored doesn't just silence a voice. It undermines confidence, strains relationships, and erodes trust. Every ignored warning reinforced the realization that I couldn't rely on others to validate my perspective. I had to trust my instincts, document my findings meticulously, and continue advocating for what I knew was right, even if no one seemed to care. That realization, while empowering in some ways, was also isolating. The emotional landscape was complex, a mix of anxiety, frustration, and growing resolve, all tied to the knowledge that my warnings were correct, yet unheeded. Despite the emotional weight, being ignored also revealed something vital about resilience. It forced me to confront the reality that not every voice will be heard, no matter how logical, clear, or necessary the insight might be. It was a harsh reminder that leadership, ego, and overconfidence can blind people to truths that are plain to others. And yet, within that struggle, a quiet determination grew, an understanding that being ignored was not failure. It was a challenge, a test of persistence, and an opportunity to prove through results that what I had warned about mattered profoundly. Every dismissal became fuel, every overlooked warning a reason to remain vigilant and prepared for the moment when the consequences would speak louder than words. The disregard was more than a professional obstacle. It was an emotional crucible. It tested patience, tested belief in oneself, and revealed the stark reality of working with people who prioritize confidence over caution. I felt frustration, betrayal, and even anger, but I also felt a rising clarity. Being ignored didn't erase my insight or my value. It only emphasized the importance of persistence, preparation, and unwavering conviction. I realized that true impact isn't measured by immediate acknowledgement, but by the outcome of actions and the proof of foresight. The sting of being dismissed became a catalyst, sharpening my focus, intensifying my commitment, and preparing me for the moment when the reality of ignored warnings would inevitably surface. The turning point came unexpectedly, yet it was inevitable. For weeks, I had been warning about potential pitfalls in the $5 million deal, meticulously outlining every risk, every overlooked detail, and every possible scenario where things could go wrong. My reports were detailed, precise, and backed with evidence. Yet each time I presented them, my boss waved them off with casual confidence, convinced that nothing could derail the deal. I watched in quiet frustration as decisions were made in haste, deadlines were pushed aggressively, and critical steps were skipped in favor of speed and optimism. Then one morning, the first warning signs began to appear. It started subtly. An email that revealed a miscommunication between our team and the client, a minor discrepancy in the contract clauses, and a report from an external consultant that raised questions I had highlighted weeks before. At first, it seemed manageable, almost trivial, but I recognized the familiar pattern. The same overlooked issues I had been pointing out were beginning to snowball. The stress in the office was palpable. People were scrambling to fix small errors, unaware that they were only symptoms of a much larger problem. My chest tightened every time I saw the consequences of decisions that could have been prevented, and yet the gravity of the situation was still underestimated by the leadership. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Client emails started arriving with questions that revealed their growing dissatisfaction. Minor contractual errors became major roadblocks in negotiations. Teams that had been coordinated and confident suddenly found themselves misaligned. Deadlines were missed, and confusion reigned where clarity should have prevailed. I kept a detailed log of every issue, every delay, and every mistake, knowing that each one validated the warnings I had raised. The turning point was not a single event, but a cumulative effect. The moment when it became undeniable to everyone that the risks I had highlighted were now reality, and no amount of reassurance could hide it. The fallout hit hard. Meetings grew tense, voices were raised, and blame shifted from one department to another. My boss, who had dismissed my warnings with such certainty, now faced mounting questions from clients and stakeholders. Their confidence wavered, and their previously unshakable demeanor started to crack under pressure. I watched as their carefully constructed world of control began to unravel piece by piece, revealing the consequences of ignored expertise. Colleagues looked to each other with worry, knowing that the deal's collapse wasn't just a financial loss. It threatened the credibility of the entire leadership team and the future of our ongoing projects. I found myself in a strange position during this chaos. On one hand, I felt vindication, a quiet satisfaction that the warnings I had delivered with diligence were finally recognized, even if only indirectly. On the other hand, there was no joy in seeing the turmoil around me. The stress, the panic, and the disappointment that spread through the office weighed heavily on me. It was a complicated mix of emotions, relief that the truth was finally visible, frustration at the unnecessary suffering caused by disregard, and a sense of responsibility to help navigate the mess as best I could. The turning point was emotional as much as it was practical. The moment when reality finally caught up with arrogance and denial. Clients began to demand explanations for the delays and errors, and the $5 million deal teetered on the edge of collapse. I could see my boss struggling to maintain composure, juggling client complaints, internal conflict, and their own sense of failure. Meanwhile, I quietly stepped in where needed, providing clarity, solutions, and guidance based on the very insights that had been ignored. The turning point became not only a moment of validation, but also an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, problem-solving, and the impact of foresight. I realized that while I could not undo the mistakes made by dismissal, I could mitigate the damage and show that diligence, preparation, and persistence still mattered. The emotional intensity of the turning point was undeniable. The office atmosphere shifted from casual confidence to high alert. Every misstep, every delayed response, and every oversight was magnified. I felt the tension in every interaction, the strained voices, the hurried emails, and the constant scramble to keep the deal afloat. Yet, amidst the chaos, I also recognized a pattern of accountability forming. The turning point wasn't just about the collapse of the deal. It was about revealing the consequences of neglecting advice, undervaluing expertise, and prioritizing ego over careful consideration. It was a hard lesson, but one that reinforced the importance of listening, preparation, and vigilance. As the deal unraveled further, it became clear that the turning point was irreversible. The consequences of ignored warnings were now fully visible. Financial loss, damaged client trust, and shaken confidence within the company. Each mistake that compounded the situation highlighted the truth that had been dismissed for weeks. The turning point was a mix of chaos and clarity, an emotional storm that left no doubt about the cost of arrogance and the value of foresight. It was the moment when theory met reality, when ignored wisdom confronted inevitable outcomes, and when the impact of vigilance and persistence became undeniable to all. The emotional impact of the deal's collapse was overwhelming, not just for my boss, but for everyone in the office. The tension that had been simmering for weeks erupted into a wave of stress, confusion, and blame. People who had once been confident and focused now moved through the office cautiously, aware that a misstep could make them the next target of frustration or criticism. Colleagues who had supported the project tirelessly were suddenly facing the reality that months of work were unraveling in front of their eyes. Every failed email, missed deadline, and overlooked contract clause amplified the anxiety, and the collective morale of the team plummeted. It was as if the energy that had once fueled productivity and optimism had been replaced by uncertainty and fear. My boss, who had dismissed every warning I had offered, now faced the harsh consequences of overconfidence. Their reputation, carefully built over years of success, was suddenly under scrutiny. Clients began questioning decisions, looking for explanations that weren't easy to provide, and stakeholders demanded accountability for errors that could have been prevented. I could see the weight of this realization in their eyes, the sudden recognition that ignoring input from someone who understood the risks had cost them dearly. The pride that had fueled their confidence was replaced by the stress of having to confront mistakes and the public nature of the failure. Every glance exchanged among senior staff was filled with unspoken tension, each interaction a reminder of what had been lost and how preventable it had been. The fallout extended beyond my boss to the team, and even to myself. Witnessing the repercussions of ignored warnings stirred a complex mix of emotions. There was frustration and anger at the needless mistakes, a sense of vindication that the risks I had highlighted were indeed real, and an underlying sadness for the team members whose hard work and dedication had been undermined. The emotional weight of seeing others stressed, anxious, or demoralized was intense. I had to balance my own feelings of validation with empathy for colleagues who were suffering the consequences of leadership decisions that they had no control over. It became clear that the stakes were not just financial, but deeply personal. Trust had been broken, confidence shaken, and the cohesion of the team put at risk. Every interaction in the office became charged with emotion. Meetings that once focused on strategy now revolved around damage control. Emails carried an undertone of urgency and frustration, each message a reminder of the mistakes that could have been prevented. My boss struggled to maintain composure, often responding defensively or with visible stress, while colleagues whispered in corners, questioning what went wrong and who should be held accountable. The office, once a place of structured activity and forward momentum, felt like a pressure cooker of tension and anxiety. The emotional impact of seeing months of preparation collapse before my eyes was profound, leaving everyone involved grappling with the consequences of ignored advice and underestimated risks. As the situation unfolded, the personal toll became more apparent. Colleagues who had invested long hours, sleepless nights, and intense focus into the deal now felt their efforts were wasted. Morale dropped, and a sense of helplessness permeated the team. I could see the disappointment in their faces, the subtle frustration in their voices, and the quiet fear that the failure might reflect poorly on them, even though they had done everything they could. The emotional impact was not just about the lost deal or the financial cost. It was about shattered expectations, broken trust, and the stress of navigating a crisis that could have been avoided. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with a mix of guilt, frustration, and helplessness, and it was impossible to ignore the human element of the disaster. For my boss, the collapse was a humbling experience. Confidence had been replaced by doubt, authority by uncertainty, and pride by the urgent need to explain, justify, and manage the fallout. Every call from the client was a reminder of what had been lost, every board meeting a chance for accountability, and every interaction with the team a reflection of the damage caused by ignoring sound advice. The emotional strain was palpable, creating tension in relationships, decision-making, and even day-to-day operations. It was a vivid demonstration that the consequences of arrogance and neglect extend far beyond financial numbers. They touch people's emotions, trust, and professional relationships in ways that are immediate and lasting. Even for me, the emotional impact was layered. There was satisfaction that the warnings I had offered were proven accurate, yet it was tempered by concern for the fallout on colleagues and the organization. Watching the chain reaction of stress, disappointment, and tension highlighted the profound effects that ignored warnings can have on human beings. It was no longer just a story of a failed deal. It was a story of emotional turbulence, leadership missteps, and the high cost of dismissing insight and expertise. The experience left a lasting impression, demonstrating that the stakes of responsibility extend far beyond numbers and contracts, reaching deeply into the hearts and minds of everyone involved. The lesson I took from this experience was one of resilience, persistence, and the importance of trusting your instincts, even when others dismiss them. Watching the $5 million deal collapse because of ignored warnings was painful, but it became a turning point in how I approached both my career and life. I realized that truth and foresight are powerful tools, but they are only effective when paired with courage. The courage to speak up, even in the face of dismissal, and the courage to stand firm when your expertise is questioned. It wasn't enough to know the risks. I had to voice them relentlessly, document them carefully, and prepare for the moment when reality would inevitably align with my warnings. That process, though exhausting, strengthened my sense of purpose and self-confidence. I learned that setbacks, no matter how public or painful, are opportunities for growth. When the deal began to unravel, I felt a rush of emotions: frustration, vindication, and empathy for those affected. But instead of letting them paralyze me, I used them to fuel action. I focused on what I could control, providing clarity where confusion reigned, helping colleagues navigate the immediate fallout, and offering solutions that mitigated damage. By turning my attention from anger to action, I discovered a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced before. The failure of the deal became less about blame and more about learning how to maintain professionalism and integrity under pressure. One of the most important lessons was the value of persistence. For weeks, I had been ignored, my advice dismissed, and my concerns undervalued. Yet, I kept documenting my warnings, creating detailed analyses, and presenting them repeatedly, knowing that the consequences of inaction were far too serious to remain silent. Persistence in the face of dismissal was difficult, but it proved critical when the reality of the situation unfolded. It reinforced the idea that standing firm is not about ego. It's about responsibility, foresight, and the willingness to endure discomfort to protect others and uphold standards. That persistence ultimately demonstrated that insight and preparation matter, even when recognition is delayed. I also realized the significance of preparation. The collapse of the deal could have been catastrophic, but because I had anticipated risks and documented them meticulously, I was able to step in and help stabilize the situation. My preparation became a form of quiet leadership, showing that proactive thinking and careful analysis can provide solutions even in moments of crisis. It reinforced the understanding that competence is proven not only by preventing failure, but also by how effectively you respond when challenges arise. Preparation, coupled with courage and persistence, creates a foundation that allows you to influence outcomes even when others fail to heed your warnings. Empathy and emotional intelligence also emerged as key takeaways. While I felt vindicated that my concerns had been valid, I was acutely aware of the stress and disappointment experienced by colleagues and my boss. Learning to navigate these emotions, provide support, and maintain professionalism amidst chaos was a crucial part of the lesson. I realized that success is not just about predicting outcomes. It's about helping people survive challenges, recover from setbacks, and move forward stronger. The ability to balance personal validation with empathy for others' struggles became an invaluable skill, shaping how I approach conflict and leadership in the future. Another profound insight was the importance of trust in oneself. For weeks, my advice had been ignored, and it would have been easy to doubt my own judgment. But by staying true to my analysis and instincts, I maintained clarity and direction even as others faltered. Trusting oneself means having confidence in your knowledge, preparation, and intuition, while also being willing to act on it despite resistance. That internal trust became the cornerstone of resilience, allowing me to navigate the chaos of the failing deal without losing composure or direction. Finally, I learned that adversity can be transformed into motivation. The collapse of the deal, while initially devastating, became a catalyst for personal and professional growth. It reinforced the principle that setbacks are not the end. They are lessons in accountability, foresight, and resilience. The experience taught me that even when others fail to recognize your insights, the value of persistence, preparation, and courage endures. It also reminded me that real influence is demonstrated through action, integrity, and unwavering commitment, and that true success comes not just from being right, but from using knowledge and insight to make a meaningful impact when it matters most. This experience instilled a sense of empowerment and inspiration that has stayed with me ever since. I understood that setbacks, mistakes, and even failures caused by others' negligence are not limitations. They are opportunities to grow, to demonstrate resilience, and to turn challenges into triumphs. I embraced the lesson that speaking the truth, trusting yourself, and persisting in the face of dismissal are not just professional tools. They are life skills that shape character, influence, and legacy. It was a lesson that transformed a moment of frustration and vindication into a lifelong blueprint for courage, responsibility, and personal empowerment.